If there's one rematch in One Piece that people can't wait to see, it's definitely the one that would make Zoro the world's strongest swordsman, which is of course when he's able to take down the one and only Mihawk. But that could also mean starting a war with the entire Cross Guild, or potentially ending one. But before we can even get to that point, I think Zoro is going to see at least one, if not several, upgrades to his swords. And yes, part of that will involve finally forging his own Black Blade, but the first step that I want to discuss is actually upgrading the Sandai Katetsu because it's still his lowest ranked blade. And Oda actually gave Zoro a perfect chance to do that when Luffy found the Nidai Katetsu early on in Wano, which is the Sandai Katetsu's upgrade, but Zoro could never get his hands on it. And like we learned from Ippon Matsu of all people, the sword chooses its owner. But before we dive in, if you end up enjoying the video, please remember to give it a like, because it really does make a big difference in how the video performs. And I know all these sword names can get confusing, so let's start with a quick refresher. The Sandai Katetsu is actually a cursed blade that Zoro got all the way back in Log Town, and it was actually crafted by Oden's dad, Sukiyaki. And that blade is a part of a trio along with the Nidai Katetsu, which was crafted by someone named Kotetsu, and the Shodai Katetsu, and each one increases in rank. The lowest tier would be among the 50 skillful grade swords, and then the next one would be among the 21 great grade swords, which include Enma and Zoro's Wado Ichimonji, and then the last one would be the 12 supreme grade swords, like Mihawk's Yoru and Roger's Ace. And with the cursed blades having their own line of progression, I feel like it's set up for Zoro to progress along with it. But since Zoro already missed the opportunity to get the Nidai Katetsu, then Oda has to have something else up his sleeve, at least until Zoro can get the Shodai Katetsu, which has long been rumored to belong to the Gandhi-looking Gorosei member, so I wouldn't expect that to happen until the endgame. And yes, we could technically go back to Wano and get the Nidai Katetsu at some point, but that just doesn't seem very likely to happen anytime soon. And I actually think that sword is meant to end up with Momonosuke anyways. Yes, of course he will use Oden's Ame no Habakiri, but I also think Momo will use two sword style eventually. Yes, he only used one sword when in training with Zoro, but I mean you have to start with the basics. And Zoro was only using two sword style when training at the dojo, and they actually called him Two Sword Zoro, until he started using three swords after Kuina died. And this would also mean that Momo and Zoro both have a cursed blade from the same family, and one of Oden's blades, which kind of deepens their connection, so I really like that idea. And one of the only ways that we know of to upgrade a blade would be by making it black. And while I definitely don't think that this will be the only black blade that he gets, I do think the Sandai Katetsu makes a lot of sense to be the first. And there is a case for Enma as well. But the reason I say the Sandai Katetsu is because it's the weakest one, so it probably is the most prone to breaking. And Zoro said one of the benefits to a black blade is increasing its hardness, and they can even be so durable that even a dinosaur stepping on it wouldn't break it. So if Zoro were to be in an intense enough battle, it stands to reason that the lowest tier blade would be prone to breaking first. So it has the greatest need to become black so it can kind of keep up with the other ones. And we know that Haki blooms in life or death situations anyway, and we also know that swords are alive to some degree at least, so perhaps this is at least part of how you forge a black blade. Because we were also told in Wano that Shusui was forged into a black blade through Ryuma's many battles. So maybe the sword not only needs to be in some type of high pressure situation, but also a high number of them. Kind of like how regular swords are forged in the first place with many strikes on an anvil. But before I can dig any deeper into that, let's talk about the sponsor for today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is basically a huge online community with thousands of classes where you can learn just about anything you could imagine. I mean, there are finance courses, nutrition, and even bladesmithing classes. And I also get a lot of questions about how to edit videos or how to start a YouTube channel, and Skillshare is your place for that. I've started watching more advanced classes with Premiere Pro to speed up my editing time, like this one with Daniel Walter Scott, who's an award-winning and Adobe certified instructor. But you can also find a lot of beginner courses for video editing, as well as the ins and outs about starting on YouTube or any other platform almost. And the best part is the first 1,000 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. And now is really the perfect time to invest in yourself, because with a Skillshare membership, you can engage in your hobbies all year long, so it's the perfect way to start and keep your resolutions for the new year. So make sure to click my link and get started today. But let's get back to the video and start with the Wado Ichimonji, which is arguably Zoro's most important sword, being that he got it from Kuina's dad after she died, and it's the one that he used to cut Mr. One back in Alabasta. And I have basically zero doubt that this blade will become black at some point. I mean, it's already a great grade sword, so having it become black would almost put it on the same tier as Mihawk's Yoru. And if Zoro is going to end up with 3 supreme grade swords by the end, which I definitely expect, then this fits right in as an endgame sword. And now I want to move on to Zoro's most recent sword, which is Enma. Enma is really interesting because it kind of fits into that third slot that's changed a few times since the start of the Grand Line. First, Zoro had Yubashiri until it was rusted away in Eni's lobby, and then he got Shusui from Ryuma, and then he obviously traded it for Enma from Hiyori. And it's also kind of a tweener where it's the same rank as the Wado Ichimonji and even crafted by the same person, being Shimotsuki Kozaburo, but it acts a lot more like a curse sword would. I mean, it almost killed Zoro during his fight with King, and a lot of people think that Grim Reaper could be Enma personified, although we don't have that confirmed, of course. And this blade is kind of special because it's the only one that scarred Kaido twice, and the Ame no Habakiri did so once. And despite Enma's insane power, Zoro did show that he was getting a handle on how to use Enma during his fight with King. So I suspect that Enma will start to feel more like a normal blade as time goes on, since Zoro can handle it better, kind of like how Oden could. So I think it will need something to differentiate it so that it stands out a little more as time goes on. I mean, Sukiyaki already hinted that Zoro may be the one to turn it black, so I definitely think that's on the table because it would also upgrade it to a supreme grade. And Enma has already been through a ton of tough battles with Oden, so maybe it's closer to becoming black than we think. But then I also thought to myself, like, wouldn't that be a little too straightforward? Zoro's already changed that sword a few times now, kind of unexpectedly, so I tried thinking outside of the box a little bit. I mean, one option is that he just gets another sword altogether, but we're pretty close to the end, so unless another legendary samurai happens to have one of his swords available, which is how Zoro got the last 2, then I'm not sure if that will happen. I mean, maybe he gets Shusui back once Wano knows he's related to Ryuma, but even that's a stretch, I think. But the option that I like the most is that he actually imbues a devil fruit into one of them. And we've already seen devil fruit powered swords in the story. The best example is Funkfried, who is literally a sword with an elephant fruit, but there are even some adjacent examples like Napoleon, who is just a bicorn, which is a type of hat, but he can also transform into a bunch of different blades thanks to Big Mom's soul powers. And thanks to Oda's SBS and Enma's connection to Wano, I think the best possible fruit for Zoro's sword is none other than a dragon fruit. Oda gave us a list of each devil fruit that the Straw Hats would have if they had one, and for Zoro, he actually said his sword would get Kaido's Uo Uo no Mi model Seiryu. And now that we know zone fruits have their own wills, and that swords even have some type of will, and that Enma happened to scar Kaido twice, maybe there is actually some kind of connection here. Or maybe there's a chance that Shusui gets it because it's the only way it would ever increase to a supreme grade, at least I think. It's already a black blade, but it's still a great grade sword, and since it slayed a dragon hundreds of years ago with Ryuma, it would kind of make sense, I think. But honestly, Kaido's fruit is kind of hard to imagine since he'd probably have to die first, and we don't even know where he's at right now. But we're very lucky that Kaido's fruit just happens to be the most well-duplicated fruit that we're aware of, since Vegapunk told us the color was the only thing he got wrong. Now, he isn't sure if the duplicates can awaken yet, but still, it's pretty freaking close. And honestly, since Oda named Kaido's fruit directly in the SBS, I think Zoro getting a replica fruit is almost more likely anyway. And Zoro did say they needed a favor from Vegapunk when they first got to Egghead Island. Now, the official Viz version said we need a favor, so I feel pretty strongly at this point that he's referring to curing the smile effects for the people of Wano, but it's still interesting to note. And if Vegapunk is actually going to be with the crew for a while, then there's a lot of opportunity for them to talk about devil fruits. Like, what if he shows Frankie or Chopper how he made a replica of Kaido's fruit by making yet another one? And since he isn't very good at getting the colors right, what if the dragon actually turns green instead? Likewise, maybe Vegapunk will want to show how you can put fruits into inanimate objects, and so that fruit will get put into Enma. Plus, think of what that would mean for Enma, or potentially Shusui if Shusui got a fruit. I mean, after spending 20 years or more trying to take down a dragon that took over Wano, one of these swords could finally be the dragon. It kind of reminds me of how Momo and the Scabbards fought Kaido across 20 years of time just to put another other dragon in charge, being Momo. And even in the distant past, Ryuma had to slay a dragon to save Wano, and Zoro seems to be related to him. It's like Wano has spent enough time being attacked by dragons and just finally decided to be protected by them. Or in the event Zoro doesn't end up keeping Enma or getting Shusui back or whatever, then maybe he actually upgrades the Sandai Katetsu all the way from Skillful Grade to Supreme by both making it black and giving it a devil fruit. But now that we've covered what Zoro's swords will look like by the end of the story, I want to talk about what I see as some of his biggest upcoming fights, mainly being Mihawk, Shiryu, and the Gandhi-looking Gorosei member. And I'm going to start with Mihawk because that's just the one we've all been waiting for. And now that Mihawk is in the Cross Guild, that fight somehow got even more interesting. And while we'd all love to see Zoro vs Mihawk, I'm not so sure everyone is as excited to see the other fighters go at it again with the Cross Guild. I mean, Croc might be cool, but do we really want to see Buggy and his crew fight another time? And a lot of people have theorized that the Cross Guild will pick up other previously defeated villains, like Doflamingo for example, and I'm just going to take a guess that Oda's going to find something more interesting than having them all fight again. And maybe there can be a situation where we just see Zoro and Mihawk fight for all the marbles instead of everyone else, like at the end of a Davy Back fight. And I know that scares some people off right away, so instead of even talking about the other competitions, let's just focus on the last one, because a Cross Guild vs Straw Hat Davy Back fight would be the absolutely perfect opportunity to see Zoro vs Mihawk. In a Davy Back fight, the final round consists of a 1v1 fight. You might remember when Afro Luffy took out my main man Foxy back on Long Ring Longland, and since the Cross Guild's strongest combatant is Mihawk, I think he would definitely be chosen. So that would mean Luffy has to decide whether he's going to take on the challenge, or let Zoro do it, since Zoro did promise a long time ago that he'd never lose again. And since Luffy is the type to have the utmost faith in his crew, I don't think he'd have any issue giving Zoro the chance. But in doing so, that basically means that Zoro has a 1v1 versus the world's strongest swordsman to not only protect his dream, but also that of his friends. Losing to Mihawk in that specific scenario would be the end of Luffy's pirate journey and probably the dreams of the rest of the crew. And while I'm not sure how the rest of the Davy Back fight would go down, this possible scenario alone makes me want to see it happen. And while I don't know exactly what order Zoro's final fights will come in, I'm just going to talk about Shiryu next because I can keep it pretty short and sweet. Whether Zoro is already the world's strongest swordsman or not, Shiryu is going to pose an interesting challenge by turning invisible. Zoro has enough time finding out where he's going when he can see, so I can only imagine how difficult it'll be to find someone that he can't see. And Zoro is proficient in armament and apparently conqueror's haki, but observation haki is the one that he seems to need the most work on. So this fight would pose a very interesting challenge, even if Zoro is the world's strongest swordsman. And I like the idea that Shiryu manages to imbue his sword with another devil fruit as well, like maybe the diamond fruit, but you could check out this video from Preach for more info on that idea. And that leaves us with the Gandhi Gorosei guy, which I feel is probably Zoro's final fight, since the Gorosei and the world government in general are very likely to be involved in the final war. And since this Gorosei member seems to have the highest graded curse blade, I think that provides some insight into how this fight goes down. Because while none of us are 100% sure on how Asura works yet, I would imagine that Zoro isn't the only one that can use it or knows about it. It could be tied to his lineage or his will, or maybe simply his curse blade, since we didn't see him use Asura until after he got it. But whatever it is, I think the Gandhi Gorosei guy will be able to use it too, but maybe even on a higher level. While Zoro may be the world's strongest swordsman by this point, sword skill only matters so much when the enemy can multiply himself 3, 30, or maybe 300 times. It actually reminds me of something from the Chimera Ant arc of Hunter x Hunter, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want to be spoiled on that. But I think the Gandhi Gorosei member could end up a lot like Netero when he fought Meruem. Maybe instead of tripling himself like Zoro does with Asura, he can make 100 or even 300 of himself. So Zoro is constantly fighting a barrage of attacks that basically makes him use observation on an insane level to avoid those attacks, but also armament and conquerors to do any damage. And this fight between Zoro and the Gorosei might even tell us a lot about the past behind Wano. While Oda decided to leave out the details behind Zoro's past while we were there, we do know it's extremely important. And Momo's is as well, since his mom was literally born during the Void Century and his dad was a Kozuki. And if Tokyo is from the Amatsuki clan, which existed outside of Wano 800 years ago when the world government took over, then maybe this old samurai guy has some kind of connection to it. But thank you all for watching the video, and until next time, stay safe.